Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James, and today we're going to take a look at creating a dissolving shader effect in Unity that we can control at the touch of a button. So you can see here I can turn these objects on and off whenever I want. And this is a handy little effect that you can use for your enemies disappearing or your player respawning and stuff like that. And it's a pretty fun and simple thing to do. So let's go ahead and dive in to making this work. So I'm in a very simple project here with just a few little models thrown in, and I'm in the universal render pipeline all set up and ready to go. So I'm going to create a shader graph that we can use to create this effect. And it's really easy and simple to do. So I'm going to go and create a new folder first of all that I'm going to call my Glow Dissolve folder. And then in here I'm going to create a new shader, and I'm going to create a PBR graph, which is the standard kind of graph that we use, and then I'm going to create a Glow Dissolve shader. And then I'm going to add this to a material, so let's create a new material, where are we, material, there we go, and we'll call this Glow Dissolve, simple, and we'll just drag our shader onto that, and I'm going to add this onto this sphere here for now. So we're going to pop that in there, and let's just move our camera so we can see things properly. So you can see this sphere looks different to everything else. Everything else doesn't have anything attached to it just yet. So let's jump into our shader. And the first thing we're going to do is handle how the object actually dissolves. And for that, we're going to use a simple node called a noise node. So I'm going to go over to here, and I'm going to hit space to then go down to procedural and noise, and we're going to use a gradient noise. You can use simple noise either or Voronoi. They'll all achieve different effects. You can play around with that yourself, but I like to use this gradient noise here. So I'm going to pull this just over to the side here like this. And then what I can do is, very simply, to start off with, I can just drag the out of this to the alpha over here. You can see in our preview, at the moment, nothing will happen because we don't have alpha set up correctly on this. So if we go to our PBR master here and hit the gear icon, and over here where we have surface, we can change it from opaque to transparent. And you'll see in our preview now that noise we applied is giving us some see-through bits. So let's just save this and see how this looks back in our scene, just so we can see what's going on. And you can see immediately, okay, we're starting to be able to see through this thing. So we need to be able to control that, obviously. We don't want it to be this kind of smooth lines. Well, you could potentially, if you wanted to, do it like that, but we wanted to have nice sharp lines so we can add an outline to it and things like that. So what we're going to do is introduce an extra node here called a step node. And a step node will basically add a cutoff, so it'll be either completely white or completely black here. So it'll be completely on or off. So I'm going to pop this into the input of this. Oh, no. There we go, into the input here. And then we can control this X value to see how much is being shown. So let's pass this out here first of all to our alpha. And you can see in our preview, now it will look like this. So that immediately looks a little bit better. But obviously we want to be able to control that here. So we don't want it to just be whatever standard we have set up. We want to be able to make it different for different materials, and also we want to be able to control this, because if I pull this all the way down, you can see when it's all the way at the bottom it's fully solid, and when it's all the way at the top it is completely see-through. So we want to make it so that we can control that value, and that's what we're going to use to actually make our little character dissolve in and out. So for that we're going to have a variable that we can control. So let's create a vector1 that we'll call noise strength. Oh, if I could spell strength properly, that would be lovely too. There we go. So we're saying noise strength because this is our noise, and this is the strength of which it's going to appear in our scene. So we can drag this noise strength into here and then connect that up to the edge of the step node. And now, whatever value we put in here will apply to this. So I can change the value here to 0.5, for example, and that'll give us a nice little mid-range of it. So if I save this now and look back at our scene again, you can see there we go, we have our object. And if I go to my glow dissolve over here, you can see the strength is 0.5, but I can pull that down to 0, or I can put it up to 1, or to make sure everything completely disappears we have to go a little bit higher. So let's go to 1.25, say, we'll make it all completely disappear. But we're going to leave it at 0.5 for now, just so we can have a good look at what's happened. So we can control this now with this value. We can drag this up and down, as you can see, and make it squash in and out, which is perfect. Let's go back into our shader, And what we're going to do to make it look a little bit more interesting is make this effect scroll. So it'll make it appear in a pattern over and over, so it'll look like it's rotating around the little sphere. So let's do this over here. Before we have our gradient noise here, what we need to do is we can control where it appears by adding a tiling and offset node. So tiling and offset, and put that into the output here, or sorry, the output of this into the UV here. And you can see if I get the x-axis of this, I can control how that scales, and on the y-axis I can also move it up as well. But we're just going to move it on one axis for now. And how we control this is much like when we want to move something in Unity in general. We would move an object using time.delta time multiplied by a move speed. We're going to do that here. So I'm going to add a new vector one that we'll call scroll speed. I'm going to drag this into our shader here, and then I'm going to add a time node. We can have here, we have a time output, so that's our basically time.delta time. Let's set our scroll speed here to just be 0.2 by default. Then I'm going to multiply these together because we want to multiply our speed by our time.delta time. So let's type in multiply, pop this here, drag both of those in, and I'm going to collapse this because we don't need to see the full thing. And then I'm going to take this multiply, and this is a single value, so we can't put that into here because obviously that's we want to do either the x or the y axis. So we're going to make it instead go to a vector 2, and I'll pop this into the x axis, and we're going to leave y as 0 and then pop that in here. And now once that hooks up, there we go, we now see our effect starting to scroll. The one other thing we can do is actually control the size of this effect here. You can see we've got this nice pattern, but maybe that's too big or too small for your liking. So let's go back over here. I'm going to add one more vector that we're going to call the noise scale, like so. And we'll drop this into the scene here, and this is going to go into the scale input of our noise here. And we need to increase the default size of this. Let's put this back up to, let's just put it at 7, say, for now. So let's save this and see it in action. So I'm going to save, and if I go to my scene view, you'll see at the moment nothing's happening. So if I happen to move over elements in the world of Unity, it'll update the shader with some time. So as we do stuff like that, you can see it in action, but obviously that's not really great. So instead we can go ahead and play the game, and we'll see, there we go, this is our effect in action at the moment. So perfect, that works just the way we want. So let's start doing some more stuff to it. At the moment, it's just a simple white surface, so we've got no color added onto it. So let's add some color to our effect here. So I'm going to add a color variable that we'll call main color. And I'm going to set this, let's just go with a blue kind of color for now, like so. I'll drop this in over here. I'm just going to simply connect this up to the albedo. So this will allow us to control the color of the object. So again, if I save, look back at our scene, you can see it's now blue. And obviously I can change that over here by changing it to any color that I want. So we're getting more control over this. The next thing we need to do is add in our outline effect. So how we're going to do this is we're essentially going to take the effect that we already have here from our gradient, and we're going to add some color at the very edges of what we have in our object here. And how we can do that is essentially by saying, well, we can't necessarily draw color around the edges of what we already have here. We can't draw color outside the bits that we have because they're invisible. But what we could do is draw some color inside the blue area that we have here. And to do that, what we can do is, using the step that we have here, we know that if we go up to our noise strength, if we change this value up to say 0.7, it decreases the area. But if we change it down to 0.3, for example, it scales it up. If I just get rid of this just for 1 second, we can see it a bit more obviously if I can just control the variable directly. So you can see if I scale it up and down like this, we get more. So if we want to have an area inside here, we know we could adjust this value and just have that show the outline, for example. So how we can do that, it sounds a little bit complicated when I say it like that, but it's very, very simple to do. All we have to do is, up here, we're going to add another step node. So I'm going to add a step, And this time, instead of it taking the input as the noise and then the strength as the edge, we're going to do it the opposite way around. So I'm going to take the output of this, and instead of going to input, we're going to edge. And from our strength here, instead of going to the edge, we're going to the input. And what we get is the exact opposite of what we have down here. So you can see they look the exact same, but just the opposite colors. And then what we can do is say, well, if this is our white area that we can color in, so we can add some color to this, what we could do is make this a little bit bigger. So I'm going to add a new vector 1 that we'll call glow outline. And I'm going to give this a value of just 0.2 by default. And we're just going to add that to the strength that we have here. So I'm going to drag it into our scene. We're going to put in an add node. Let's just collapse this down so it's a bit smaller. I'll move this step over to here. So if instead of going straight out of there, we're going to go into the add node. So basically what we have is our noise strength at the moment is, where is it? Here we go. It's 0.3, and we're going to add 0.2 to it. So you're going to see the white area here get a lot stronger. So let's put that in there. And now you should hopefully be able to see, it's kind of a little bit hard because it's a little bit hard to see exactly what's happening, but you can see the white area here is bigger than the black areas here. So now if I take this value and send it out to the emission here, like so, you can see immediately we get some outlines. And we can control the strength of these outlines by controlling this size here. So 0.1, we can go quite small. We could go quite big if we wanted to, like so. So perfect, we now have some outlines. But obviously we don't just want these white outlines. We want to be able to color this. So let's add another color value. So color down here that we'll call, let's call it the glow color. And let's make this red by default. Pop that in here. And then what we can do is multiply our step by our color here to mix them together. So let's multiply here color by the output of the step, and now we get this black and red effect. So now when I plug that in here, we can see, okay, we get this nice red effect. I'm just going to save this, and we're going to see one little thing here, and then we're going to return in a second. So if we go back in here, now you can see that is working the way we want it to, so perfectly happy with that. If I go to my game view, you can see it's glowing a little bit just by the default color and just by the bloom settings I have set up on here, but I want to be able to control how much it's glowing. So let's go back into our shader here, and where we have our glow color here, I'm going to change it from being the default mode to a HDR mode. So now if I save this, go back into our scene, let's look at our material over here. You can see it's now a HDR material, so I can go here and I can increase the intensity of this. If we just look at our game view, we'll see it in action. So if I increase the intensity, you should see it get a bit stronger. It's a little bit hard to tell sometimes, but if I pull it way down as well, you can see it kind of fades out and disappears. So that allows us to be able to control this stuff a little bit nicer as well. So with that done then, let's jump back into our shader. And one extra thing I'm going to do is just to make this effect look a little bit more dynamic, I'm going to go over here, and where we have this whole section of our noise here, I'm going to group all of this together. So I'm going to select all of this, and I'm going to right click and group this selection, and I'm actually just going to drag this bit up here so it makes a bit more sense, and I'm just going to call this the noise group. And what I'm going to do is duplicate this. So I'm going to right click, duplicate, I'm going to pull it down here, and we're going to add a scroll upwards instead of just sideways. So all I'm going to do is go over here and put this on the y-axis. So now we have these two effects going on here, and I'm going to multiply both of these together so we get a more interesting pattern appearing in our glow effect here. So I'm going to hit multiply, and then I'm going to take everything that's coming out of this one, I'm going to make it come out of this multiply here, like so, and I'm going to pass in both of these into our multiply, like so. And there we go. Now we get a more interesting pattern to our glow effect. So perfect. I'm perfectly happy with that. That's exactly what I want our little shader to do. So let's go back into our scene, and if I go ahead and just play the game again, we'll see it in action. It's just rippling and warping away, And we know that we can control how strong it is by controlling things like the noise strength and the size of the glow outline. So I'm going to make this glow outline a much smaller one as well. I think that size kind of works a bit better. And let's create a couple of different materials for these different objects. So let's add 3 more materials in here, and I'm going to change the color of all of these. So let's go for darker main color and say a green outline, and we'll pop that on. Let's pop it on this guy. This robot here will have, should have a more gray kind of skin, and we'll give him some yellow outline like so. And then this cube, let's do something a little bit more interesting. Let's make it, we'll go with a red main, and we'll go for yellow as well, like so. So now we've got 4 different materials in action here, and you can see if I go ahead and play the game, they're just rippling away like they are. But we want to be able to control the effect that's actually happening here through a script. So you obviously want this to happen at various different times, maybe when your player respawns, or when you get hit or something like that, or when you're just teleporting out of a scene, who knows. So we want to be able to control essentially what happens with, let's look at this guy here, our noise strength. We want to make it go from being completely solid to gradually disappearing like that. So what we're going to do is go into our, we're going to create a script, create a C# script that I'm going to call dissolver, and I'm going to add this to where our material is on this object. So if I go to my robot Kyle here, which is this guy, I'm going to go where we have the material here, we're going to attach the script like so, and we're going to open this script up and write some very simple code that will handle this. So the first thing we're going to need is up here, we're going to create a reference to the material that we want to change the effect on. So I'm going to create a private material that we'll just call the mat for the material. And then in my start function, I'm going to say the material is from, we want to get the renderer component that we have attached, not render buffer, renderer, a component that we have attached to the same game object. And within that renderer, we want to get the material from it. So the material that we have assigned. And then what we're going to do is we're going to keep track of whether we should be showing or hiding the object. So we're going to say public bool hide object, we'll say. And then we also want to control how fast we make this happen. So we'll say public float dissolve speed. And I'm going to give that a default value of 2. So we want this to happen when we press a button. So I'm going to say if input.getKeyDown, and let's use key code D for dissolve for now. This is relatively simple. And all this is going to do is tell the hide object to be the opposite of its current value. And this obviously isn't going to be a script. This probably isn't going to be a script that you're going to use in your game. So, and it's not exactly the most performance script in the world, but it'll do what we want it to do. Because all we're going to do now is constantly check in our update loop whether we should be showing or hiding the object. And if hide object is true, then we want to make sure that the value on our material, if we go back into Unity here, let's look at, well, we're doing the robot here, so let's control the robot here. We want to make sure the noise strength here goes all the way down to the bottom. And if it's, it should be invisible, we want the noise strength to be all the way up the top. So we want to be able to control this value. So obviously we would need to go and look at the material. And then within that, we need to know how do we set that value. So you might think that we could just directly set the noise strength here. So we could go in here and say the material, and we could use the set float ability. And we could tell it, hey, the name of the float we want to set is the noise strength that we set up. But the problem is, if we just run this as a default thing here for a second, let's say we're going to set the value of this to be 1. So let's test this out and see what happens. If I save this and go back in, we know we have this script on our robot guy here. And hide object is off by default, so if I play, this will be perfectly fine when I just play. But if I then go ahead and turn hide object on, or if I hit the D key, well, nothing's happening. Hide object is being marked as on. Probably a bad example of this is that the strength is actually working perfectly fine. Let's put the strength back up to full. But if I go ahead and hit the D key now, nothing is happening. And why is nothing happening? There's no errors showing up in our console or anything like that, so we could be a little bit confused about what's happening. But the reason is that with shaders like this, if we look at the material, when we try to access noise strength here, it's not actually directly accessing this name. What it's accessing is, if we go back to our shader and go to noise strength, it's trying to access this reference here. So it's trying to, what we want to actually change is the thing that's typed in the value here. So rather than having to remember these weird combinations of numbers and letters, what we can do is simply delete this and replace it with a fairly common thing to do is to put an underscore in front of the variable name that you want to use. So I'm going to use underscore noise strength, like so. And we're going to make sure that we save this asset then. And now, back in our script, what we'll do is actually tell the underscore noise strength to be set. So let's save that, go back in here, and we should see when I press the key now, we'll make our object pretty much disappear. Because we'll be setting it to be 1. So I'm going to hit D, and there we go. It immediately set it to 1, and it's now something that we can't do anything else with for the moment. So we want it to be gradually moving between different values. So we have our noise strength. What we wanted to do is, instead of just being itself, we're going to say mathf.move towards from whatever our value currently is. So we're going to say the material.getFloat, and we want to use the same name, so underscore noise strength, like so. And then what we wanted to go to is, we're going to set to go to 1.25 because 1 isn't quite enough to make everything disappear. So 1.25, and how fast we want that to happen is whatever our dissolve speed is multiplied by time.delta time. Let's put another close bracket, there we go. Nope, we're missing one more. Oh no, there we go. I'm supposed to close that one. I was getting lost in my brackets there for a moment. Okay, so that's that done. That will make it disappear, but obviously we also want to make it reappear, which will just be the opposite way around. So I'm just going to copy that whole line, and in here, instead of going to 1.25, we're going to go to minus 0.25. Okay, so save that. Let's jump back into Unity. And now I can go ahead and play this. And we should see, if I hit D, there we go. We get our little guy disappearing from our scene. So perfect, that's working exactly the way we want it to. What we can then do is do the same thing with our other objects. So I can get my eaten body here, and I have, let's actually attach this script to, or this material to the glasses as well of this character. So I'm going to put the dissolve script on there. Let's make this one dissolve a little bit faster, or sorry, slower. So we'll make that be a nice slow one. The cube I have here, let's pop that on. Let's go for 1 second, and then the sphere, let's go for 1.5. Just as an example of how this can look with different speeds. So I can just turn these on or off. I actually kind of like the slow one on the player character as well. But that's basically all we need to do. So there we go. That's how we can control a shader through a bit of code, and how we can create a very, very simple and easy to use glowing dissolve effect, which is a lot of fun and actually works very well in lots of different cases. So thanks for watching. I'll be back soon with more tutorial goodness. Keep up the good work. Don't forget to hit that subscribe and like buttons to keep all these videos going and keep everybody being able to see what's going on here. And if you haven't already, make sure you go and wishlist our game Skook Kaboom on Steam, which is coming soon, and it's getting a whole bunch of work being done on it, and we'll have a new devlog up very soon for the game. So thanks for watching. I'll see you all very soon. Keep being awesome.